Welcome to InsideAuto Podcast, where we feature everyone and anyone you'd want to talk to in and out of the automotive industry.
Hello, everybody. This is Aharon Horwitz, co-host, usually with Ilana Shabtai, but today not, of the InsideAuto Podcast, where we talk about everything automotive, interview top dealers, general managers, marketers, entrepreneurs, thought leaders inside, outside of automotive. As you know, we're kicking off a new season. We're super excited. I'm going to tell you in a minute about today's guest, the perfect person to kick off this new season. But before we introduce Neil, this episode is sponsored by Auto Lead Star. The Auto Lead Star platform is built on a technology so powerful it allows you to market, sell, and service cars as you would in the real world at scale and online, making one-to-one matches between shoppers and inventory. Auto Lead Star is the only platform that is powered by scale, speed, and specificity to change the way dealers do marketing. Neil Ackerman, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
We're so excited
right
to have
Philadelphia you today.
Calling in from Philadelphia, where what happened yesterday? Did they win?
No. It's hard to beat the Chiefs. And some of the listeners may know that I lived in Seattle and I'm a big Seahawk fan, but my Seahawks won. So
well, I have to say, as a Browns fan, I feel free to make fun of Philly fans, but we long suffering here. So Neil, for those who do not know, and some of you actually may know Neil, he really is the perfect man to be interviewing at this time, because Neil's specialty now in his role at Johnson & Johnson, where he is a senior executive working on global supply chain innovation, but also new initiatives and innovation. Prior to that, when he was at Amazon, frankly, at other roles at J&J, but at Amazon, where he was in those insane years where Amazon was figuring out how you actually ship everything and make everything and get everything everywhere. Neil, I don't know if he would share this, but I know he was involved in like 11 key patents that Amazon has. And much of the stuff that comes to your door is probably coming through one of the things that Neil invented. So he is the person who understands, the person in the world, one of them, who actually understands supply chains, global supply chains. And we want to just have an intelligent conversation, Neil, about what is going on. But before that, and this is true of every Inside Auto guest, we want to know about you. How did you come to where you are, and what was that journey that led you, I guess, first to kind of what you were doing at Amazon, and then after that into J&J?
You know, like every good supply chain, it started out slow. I had to figure
every
out.
Journey begins with a single step, right?
I had to figure out, how to get there. But I would say that in the end, I really wanted to focus on initiatives and companies that were global and would influence the world in a great way. And I quickly realized that one of the most important parts of a corporation is their supply chain. And knowing that this is part of a revenue generating machine that you're now seeing come to fruition. This is why I decided to, do that career. I would say this is a long answer, but to get to the short of it, it's about having great friends, good family, working hard, and making it happen. So this is why I'm here today. I enjoyed the years and living. I moved 11 times. I just came back from living overseas in Israel, and now I'm back. So can't wait to have this conversation, and thanks for having me.
Okay, so Neil, let me ask you this before we get to kind of automotive and what our listeners probably are thinking about. When you came to Amazon, what was the supply chain under control? Meaning, was it organized at that time, or was it still happening, coming together? And to what extent did you understand, I guess, from more of maybe your previous background, but also academically, to what extent did you understand supply chains when you walked in the doors in Amazon? Or was that a learning process for you?
Look, to be honest, yes, I did have the academic background. Some of you will know some of the schools, MIT, UVA, University of Richmond, et cetera. But that is just in the textbook. And the truth is that at that time, Amazon was, of course, inventing. It was inventing things. And there was a lot of friction in the supply chain and getting things delivered. And, the opposite of friction is, you see it when you know it, and it's called harmony. And really what Amazon brought at that time was harmony to these, the lives of consumers, harmony to suppliers that did it the way that this new way of doing it online was. And when you bring harmony, what does that lead to? It leads to customer satisfaction, consumer smiles, and delight. So when you reduce friction and you bring harmony, you cause delight. And that's really the story. So did I know it all? No. Did anyone know it all? No. But we did know that you got to reduce friction to bring harmony and cause delight. And so, yes, you are right that some of the most important pieces was understanding not just how to ship a t-shirt, but how do you ship an item that's $10 and under 5 ounces? At that time, it was almost impossible because the shipping was very expensive. It was like $6-7. And how do you ship big and bulky items? And most of your listeners know how difficult that is. And how do you do this all at scale at a price point that works? And the real answer was that you had to spin what they call a flywheel faster and faster. You had to get more items through the system to get the transmission moving, get the clutch going, and to get that car. So to get that thing driving. And so what we ended up doing was we realized very quickly that you'll never do it by having a limited selection and high prices and not a lot of convenience. You had to do it all in a formula. And so the formula that I've learned and still do in all the industries I've played with since is consumers, dealers, wholesalers, they don't wake up in the morning and say, I want to pay more. They say, I want to pay less. They don't wake up in the morning and say, I have a great idea. I'm going to limit selection because that's not going to work. People want more choices. And they don't wake up in the morning and say, I want this to take 4 weeks to get. They want it when they want it. And so if you drive a flywheel by lowering prices, giving great selection, and always being very convenient, you're going to improve harmony and increase delight. And this is how I think about business. And I've done that end to end for 25 plus years in the supply chain world. And so, that's my focus.
So let me ask you to give us maybe one example where you, just because it's the type of stuff that many of us don't see, right? I assume you were rolling around in all sorts of places that many people don't get to, trying to understand how things are produced at their source. But what's an example maybe in any of the places that you've been of a friction point that you were able to smooth out? And you can be as specific or general as you want, but I'm just curious. I think that'd just be an interesting insight for our listeners.
Yeah, sure. So one that's a lot of fun is every time someone gets an envelope from Amazon, let's just say, and by the way, most items at Amazon, you won't believe it, but most 70% or more of items are under $15. Frankly, they're under like $12. But
wow.
And those items, they come to you and you get them now, sometimes the same day, sometimes the next day. But the biggest friction was, how do you get these little cheap items to people at a cost-effective manner when they want them? And this was the beginning of really the march towards consumables and getting that to the folks. And this is before grocery and all that infrastructure. And the answer was through partnership. The way Amazon was able to partner not just with their sellers and their suppliers, but also on the other side, which is the US Postal Service at the time, and even the transportation between the Postal Service. So an example would be, they would get an order, we would pack the item at a fulfillment center that was custom to these small items for a small and light fulfillment center. And then instead of injecting them at that point, we would drive it to the injection at the postal service. So that would reduce touches. And when you reduce touches, you reduce miles, you reduce cost structure. And therefore, this is a very high level, but therefore we were able to get these items for a profit to, tens of millions of consumers. And this was the beginning of what is now a monstrous program for small and light delivery across the infrastructure, now global. And that's one of the patents that I worked on. So that's an example of being creative, working with different stakeholders end to end, and then coming up with something that people don't think will happen. Another one that I'm thinking about now for the future is, what will drone delivery be like? This is how these big ideas start. Will there be drone delivery? Yep. Where will it be? Probably the suburbs to start. Are there big enough suburbs? Yep. 80 million homes in America that are ready in the suburbs. Why would people want it? Well, I'm living here now, and I don't like paying $19 for a hamburger to come to my house, because I got to pay $4.99 to, DoorDash, and then they got to give a $5 tip, and then I have to, buy it at a premium, and then the store has to charge me. But what if a drone could do it for less than $1? I'd probably do it, right? So there's always going to be invention and curiosity involved, but it comes back to the theme, Aharon, right? Reduce friction, bring harmony, get delight. And that's what I do.
I love that formula. It's, I think, influences that concept of customer delight is very powerful when you think about it in the context of any challenge that you're looking at. And if you make that your guiding star, it tends to drive you places, as we've talked about before.
Sure.
Yeah.
And even the dealers that are listening to you now. I mean, look, I'm a consumer. I buy cars. I got plenty of them. But, in the end, what dealers do I keep going back to? The ones that connect with me? Yep. The ones that give me a fair price. They have the selection of the car I want, or they could find the car I want in a timely manner, right? And they're convenient. They make it easy to service, so they make it easy for me to get it, or they can get me. I can get them on the phone quickly. This is what people count. You don't want to be, dare I say, the Comcast of customer service. You want to be the Amazon of customer service.
Yeah.
And so this is where I think it all starts from.
So let me segue into, I guess, the topic of everyone. I mean, I before preparing for this conversation with you, I went through a bunch of headline articles, and here's like some of the ones I saw, like the world is short of everything. Get used to it. New York Times. The world's top bankers see supply chain problems. Inflation signs run ahead. Markets work, but untangling global supply chains takes time. The best one I saw, how the world ran out of everything, right? So there's this unbelievable moment we're in, which I assume is unprecedented. You'll tell me. And it just seems like everything's hard to find. You go to a store and they have only a certain amount of thing that you order something, it's going to take longer than you ever imagined. We see it in the auto industry where, inventory is just taking so long to show up at stores. We have stores that have groups that have 10,000 cars in the lot that have like 800. And this is unbelievable to see this.
I've seen it.
Yeah. And, dealers on the one hand, like a lot of stuff is now pre-sold and they're doing orders and stuff like that. But I just think fundamentally, and then you see the stories in those amazing maps that they show of all the ships at sea. And so I just wonder, like,
I have it live right here.
Right in front of you. Yeah. So with your eye, I mean, you're plugged into one of probably what J&J is one of the biggest companies in the world, the top 5, 10. I don't know. It's a massive conglomerate that sees supply data from all over. But ignoring that, right? Just give us the understanding of like what's happening. Like, why is there this shortage? Why is it taking so long to reboot? And when does it start to turn the corner, if at all?
Yeah. So for the listeners, I mean, this is nothing to do with J&J. This is everything to do with our conversation today about supply chain and what is it fundamentally, for? Now, in the end, I'm going to tell everyone, I do not have the golden answer. Okay. I do not know everything about this, and no one does. That's the first thing. So if you want to take away a big one here, no one has exclusivity on good ideas. No one. Everyone and all their ideas count as we work through what some folks are calling, we're out of stock on everything. So I would say that let's just take a step back and give some context. First, there's a lot of social media and there's a lot of influence from this. And it may not always be the case. We're not out of stock on everything. Okay. The supermarkets still have plenty of food. Yes, from time to time, for some strange, very odd reason, they run out of toilet paper, which we all know is people apparently need thousands of rolls in their house, which is stunningly stupid. But overall, you do have to admit that in general, we still have what we need. Now, with that said, are electronics weaker? Yep. Is it true that maybe you can't get lettuce at Wendy's for your salad? Yep, maybe. Is it difficult to get cars? Well, yes, but more difficult to get the chips that go in the car than it is the cars. And so what are you learning here? What is in common? Well, what it is when you have multiple parts or widgets coming from multiple places, unfortunately, you need 100% of those parts to build your item, right?
Yeah.
So when it's a simple thing like this paper pad, there's not many pieces and parts, right? But and they can come from many places. I mean, it's pulp, it's water, it's machines. I've seen them from Mexico to Russia. They're the same. But when it comes to things complicated, chips, cars, pieces, parts, now we're starting to carve out where the complications are. Now, assuming that we all agree that cars or electronics don't just come from everywhere, and assuming that we all agree that there's more parts and pieces to develop them, the real question then for us to answer is, what needs to happen to get out of this dilemma? We have an economic problem that, I'm not going to get into on this call. There's books written about this, about how the countries are integrated. And I'm certainly not going to get into the politics of every leader in every country.
Definitely not want you to do that.
So instead of doing that, why don't we just do this? Companies need to think of a few approaches. And this is what I tell all the companies that I work with. The first one is, let's make sure we don't have only one pipe for supply. So how do we get out of it? We learn from this lesson and we begin thinking about other pipes to supply items that we need. Maybe not just in Asia, maybe not just in South America. What are the other pipes? And what are those cost structures, pros and cons of the pipe, just the way it's going to be. Sometimes we'll have to pay a little more if the pipe got clogged somewhere else. This is no different than any other industry. The second thing I think we all have to take a look at is, are we being innovative enough on what we're doing? Are we digitizing enough? Are we aggressive enough with being on the cutting edge? Or are we going to be basically intercepted by someone else, by something that was more creative, that was more delightful for consumers, that had less friction, less parts, dare I say? Are there other ways of putting things together that is maybe not as traditional as what we're used to? And then the third part I always tell folks is, are you sure that you're the most global workforce you can be? What are your rules around engaging with people? How do they work? Where do they work? Because what you find is it's not just parts, right? What's a big part of a supply chain? Labor. Are you sure you have all the right labor? Do trucks need to be driven by people in the truck, or could they be remote controlledly driven? Does everything need to be delivered in the traditional way? Are there other ways to do it? Are you sure you need a container ship? Are you sure air is too expensive? Did you really price it? When you aggregate last mile, did you aggregate it, or did you only contract with 3 or 4 last mile couriers when there's 7,000 of them in the United States? So I always tell folks to look at those things and start mapping all these pieces. And what you'll find is the answers aren't what you may have thought. You'll learn that on your last mile, you were only contracting with 2 or 3 suppliers. You'll learn that on your labor, you actually don't even know where these people are or what they're doing or the metrics behind it. Are you incenting them right to be at work? Maybe you need to pay more, but at least people can get something. Yes, your prices would go up, but how much up? Are you sure that your pricing is really, do you have room in the margin? You'll be surprised. And so these are the different types of things I think about. And I know a lot of other companies are thinking about this, including the diversity of their location of supply management.
I think it's a very strong insight into kind of what's going on right now at companies all over. I have a question for you. Because of how smoothly the global supply chains function for the past 20, 30 years, at least it feels that way as a lay observer, right?
Well, as an American, in the American side, and if you're in Western Europe, yeah, it felt that way.
So let me ask you, do you think that the availability of parts, of solutions, has that stifled or sort of slowed innovation? There wasn't a need for it. Are things overly complex? Did we get too creative in how we pulled together all those parts? And did we really need all those parts? Do you think that actually had an impact on how we built stuff and thought about stuff and what possibilities were available to us? Meaning, if you couldn't rely on something, you'd have to innovate around it, right?
Right. So what does time naturally do with companies? It creates bureaucracy. Name any company that's 100 years old, and everyone will tell you they're bureaucratic. So what happens is we build processes on top of processes. And everyone knows this, and anyone listening, they cannot deny. So yeah, of course, at first things were very efficient, right? And then we built another process and then another legacy system. And before you know it, you got big corporations with 60 and 70 legacy systems, and no one knows where their stuff is. And then what happens? A startup gets created, and all of a sudden they do well. And you guys can name all the companies on the S&P 500 and the Dow that have been disrupted. Why? Were they not capable? No, they were capable. But there was inefficiency built in. People weren't delighted anymore. They weren't harmonious. There was a lot of friction. And so this opened it up for the startup to come in. And where indeed does this happen? Well, obviously, when startups were growing and growing, they were in the Valley. Why weren't they in New York? Because New York was traditional. They were the way of doing it. New York could have done it, but they didn't. The Valley decided, they were able to do it. And then another use case would be, what about in all of Europe? Why is it mostly in Berlin? They had to innovate around themselves to have an economy, to grow the country. And then of course, the big example that is, nothing to do with particularly with really anything except in this topic is Israel, and nothing to do with the political environment, but what caused Israel to be startup nation and now scale up nation. Same story. They had to innovate and grow their economy and see all the friction and to give more delight and harmony. And so their economy was built for this kind of infrastructure. And there's lots of books on things that happened in Berlin in Tel Aviv, in the Valley, and they all have that in common.
Yeah.
So this is what begins it. And then when the startup makes it, they make it big. And the people just grab onto it. And you don't have to look any further than the evidence on Wall Street to know that that's exactly what happens. No, there are lots of unintended consequences within the supply chain. Once this disruption happens, I mean, you can imagine the demand goes up, the supply goes down, people don't know where to have their network established. And you're seeing this now with, new cars being created, electric vehicles, items that are being bought on YouTube, and even brands, big consumer brands get influenced by key opinion leaders on Instagram, and all of a sudden they don't have enough inventory. So there's a lot of lessons to be learned within the supply chain. And I hope that what people get from this session is to look in their own closet first, see the skeletons across labor, technology, placement of the network, the pipeline of their supply, and then go deeper and look at things such as, can I be disrupted? Who are the startups in my space? Who are the startups that aren't in my space, but maybe they should be? And then once you start realizing this, you realize you got to be on the cutting edge of innovation. And dealers are the same way. I remember when I was working at Amazon, and Macy said Amazon could never do fashion. Well, now Amazon's the biggest fashion house. So could industries be disrupted? Absolutely. Can the car industry be disrupted? Absolutely. And so what does that look like, 10, 20 years from now? Do you think your dealer will be doing exactly the same? And I would say, no way. And if I'm a betting person, which some of you on the listening know I am, I'm involved in almost a dozen startups. No, I would definitely bet against things being the same.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, I would bet that you'll have at least 30 to 40% disruption of your current model 20 years from now. Mark that quote down, and in 20 years, you can call me and tell me if I was right. 35 to 40% disruption. What would that look like? Consumers will have different ways of convenience to go buy vehicles. The price and the way pricing is negotiated and done will be different. And the selection will be much more vast. And why? Because there'll be different modes of transportation. There'll be different ways of getting around. I'm not sure what will happen to my hybrid that I currently have plugged in my garage, but I can tell you 20 years from now, there'll be more hybrids than less. Mm-hmm. There'll be more electric than less. There'll be drones in the sky delivering things. Things will change. And I believe that the dealers that can adjust and be on that edge will win.
Well, we're going to have you back in 25 to 30 years. Or part 2 of this conversation, Neil.
That means, everyone, that this was so bad that he doesn't want me for 25 years.
I did not say anything about in between. We could also have you then, but definitely in 25 years. I'm putting it on my Google Cal, which conveniently goes ahead 25, 50 years.
Of course it does.
Of course it does. Of course. So this was very interesting, and we learned a lot. We really appreciated you sharing with us kind of your insights, and also, I think, definitely for those who are thinking entrepreneurially or dealers who are looking to think about their values, there was a lot to take away here, in particular about reducing friction, creating harmony, and leading to smiles and delight. A very poignant, powerful point. So we'll leave with that. Neil, thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, and till next time, and definitely not 25 years away. Thanks so much,
Wonderful.
Neil.
Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Inside Auto Podcast. Check out our other episodes with top entrepreneurs and industry leaders.